Hey, y'all, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I will tell you that I am in a great mood on this Monday for a few reasons. Yesterday, the Masters could not have been more fun. I know many of you watched that just like I did. I'm also in a good mood today because we have a massive giveaway I want to tell you about in just a few minutes. This is actually one of the most fun things we've done recently on DawgNation Daily. I'll tell you about that. It was a little chilly this morning when I left the house. That means pullover weather as much as I like spring and summer. I like to wear the quarter-zip pullovers. Today, I felt like there was a good opportunity to do that, and we've also got some really fun stuff coming up on today's show. One of the things I'm going to get into in a moment is kind of where my rooting interest lies on G-Day just a bit. I'll lay out some of my thoughts on that. We'll give you a chance to weigh in on this a bit, too. I also want to start the show with something really good about Zamir White as well. So we think it's just a great Monday. For those of you who are able to share it with us here today, we're glad you're here as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Major announcement coming up off the top of the program. Our friends at the Atlanta Braves have teamed up with us here at DawgNation Daily. We have got a great giveaway, and I don't use the word great lightly. This is going to be awesome. It's a ton of fun, and we'll do it just a few minutes from now, and it could not be easier to win. At least the way in to win could not be easier. So please stick with us for a couple of minutes. We got a great giveaway courtesy of our friends at the Atlanta Braves today. That is coming up in just a little bit. Let me begin this way, though. You know, there is a guy that I think generates more excitement and enthusiasm on the Georgia roster than any other player, and that is not an easy trick. There are a lot of really popular Georgia guys right now. You know, DeAndre Swift's the kind of name that kids want to put that poster on their wall. Jake Fromm's obviously been that guy now for a couple of years. The defense has their versions of that. Some of those guys are up-and-comers, guys on their way. But if you polled 100, I like to do this with sometimes kids, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids who are, into college football. Hey, who's your favorite player from the Georgia Bulldogs? You're going to get a number of names. But I don't know that there's any name right now across the board, kids, adults, everything in between. I don't know that there's anybody that gets the blood flowing, the juices flowing, the excitement going like Georgia running back Georgia running back Zamir White does. White right now is just kind of another level of excitement. And this is the classic story in sports. We're excited about the thing we haven't seen yet. We're excited about the anticipation of what could be from White. But nonetheless, no matter why it is true, the fact that it is true to me is undeniable. So I had some fun last night when White put out something on Twitter. Now, if you're listening to the show, radio, podcast, I realize you can't see this. There's also a chance you've already seen this. And if you haven't, I'll throw it up there when I post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com a little later on. But White posts a picture of himself, and it's a nice, simple message. It says, "Never complain. Take notes." And for those people who kind of want to get into the whole thing of, how intense he is with his recovery, I think a message like that ties into that just nicely. He's put some other things on social media as of late that would lead you to believe that he is seemingly very focused on getting his job done, and not for G-Day on Saturday, mind you, but by the time the summer rolls around, he is seemingly very focused on being a big part of this Georgia running game. But if we can put the picture back on the screen for one more moment, there's something else that I can't help but notice when you see Zamir White here. It's the physical condition that he seems to be in. Now, I've joked before that I'm ready to see some leg workouts, some things like that, because we've seen lots of examples this spring of the upper body strength being very impressive. This particular photo of White here reminds me a lot of the ones that emerged of Elijah Holyfield last summer when he was toting the rock during practice and those big arm muscles were bulging. In a lot of ways, Zamir White kind of comes across this way too. I'm ready to see some of the footwork drills and some of that kind of stuff from White to give us truly an indication of just what kind of shape he's in. But no doubt when White throws this out there on Twitter, there's a lot of response from UGA fans saying, I cannot wait to see him this summer. And you can count DawgNation Daily in on that train of, it is going to be really fun when Zamir White's back playing football again. And I guess, this spring, while we haven't seen a ton from White, both in terms of when we get to view a little bit of practice and kind of seemingly around the program, we haven't seen a ton of him. I do think as spring practice finishes up for Georgia this week, I do think we finished the spring with a more positive outlook than we started it with when it comes to White. Let me give you a couple examples as to why. First of all, let me start off at the beginning of spring practice when Kirby Smart gave his assessment of the situation involving Zamir. He did I think at the time, strike a bit of a cautious note. Here is what Smart said then.
Well, I don't know that I can answer how much of it. I mean, that's going to come into fall camp. I think anytime you have a non-contact ACL and then you have a second one, you've got to be careful because we're talking about two different knees and really a completely non-contact injury. So when that happens, makes you wonder, hey, is the kid going to be able to progress this time as fast as he did last time? So for us, he's going to be able to do some. I mean, he's running really well. He's doing a lot of straight line stuff. He's just not going to be involved in the scrimmaging and the contact part. So ultimately, how do I know he's going to contribute to the team? I don't know that. I'm not going to know that until probably early in fall camp. I'm very pleased with his work ethic. I mean, he knows that's his future. He takes care of his knee. He rehabs hard. He does everything we ask him to do. I think Ron is kind of one of the best in the country at dealing with this. When you look at the significant injuries he's dealt with Gurley and Nick Chubb, especially at that position. So he has somebody really good to rely on in regards to that. And Zamir's managed that really well.
If you'll remember at the time when Smart said that, I don't want to say I was disappointed because, listen, we knew he was going to be guarded with his words, but I guess in a way I was a little bit disappointed. There are a lot of phrases there that don't sound too good. Not willing to say about when he's going to be contributing, what he's going to be able to do. He uses the word careful. He says it makes you wonder after coming off 2 knee injuries. Well, I don't want wondering. I want emphatic statements of this guy's going to be back and he's going to be better than ever. At the beginning of the spring, Kirby's like, it kind of makes you wonder what he's going to be able to do. Not involved right now. Don't know what he'll be able to do this summer. That was a little bit of pumping of the brakes. Maybe a little more so than I would have expected, even though guarded language is typical from Kirby Smart. That was maybe a little more guarded than I would have liked to have had. So when Kirby first said that at the beginning of the spring, I was kind of like, that's not exactly what I want to hear. Maybe some Dog fans felt the same way. The tweet from White on Sunday, though, makes you feel a little bit better about that. And maybe the thing that made us feel, I think around here, the most positive, the most optimistic assessment of Zamir White and his injury recovery actually came from another former Georgia running back, when Robert Edwards, who, let's face it, knows the injury situation, the tailback as well as anyone possibly could, when he was with us on DawgNation Daily a couple of weeks ago, based on his own conversation with folks around the program, he actually left his time watching Georgia practice feeling very good about White. For Georgia fans who heard that then, they felt good too once Robert Edwards said this.
Talking to Ron Corson, he's right on target of being ready for the season. He's strong. Everything looks bright for him. So I think he's just excited to have an opportunity to get out on the field. Right now, he's just doing a few things during individual drills, no real contact, but just to be a part of the drill and a part of his group. I think he's excited, and he's looking forward to the season.
Y'all ever see those word cloud things on the internet where, like, some words are bigger than others, and it's meant to be a reflection of content of whatever form or fashion? If we're making a word cloud here, I like Robert Edwards' right on target phrase a lot more than I like Kirby Smart's not willing to say, or we're going to be careful, makes you wonder, not included during a lot of the practice, don't know when he'll be back. I like the Robert Edwards word cloud a lot better of right on target, and the fact that comes later on the spring, apparently having spoken to Ron Corson about it, makes you feel really good. Another thing that I really like when we had Edwards on the show, talking about Zamir White, who seems to be maybe on his way to being back and ready to go this summer, at least that's where our hope is around DawgNation Daily, is apparently when the injury for White first went down, apparently he leaned on that great legacy of RBU to help work himself back. Let's face it, a lot of injury recovery, while it seems 99% physical, I think the emotional, mental part of this is a much greater part of the makeup than some people realize. You've got to have a focused level of determination. And part of the stuff that I like when White tweets some of the things that he tweets out is it kind of shows that he's either inventing people who think that he can't get back the way he was, or maybe he's heard some actual criticism, and maybe he's heard some actual naysayers and doubters about just how good Zamir White can be coming off 2 knee injuries. Either way, he's apparently using that as motivation to prove some people wrong, either real or imaginary, come this summer. And my guess is some of the conversations he's had with former running backs like Edwards are helping him form that mindset necessary to be back on the field and be back competing as one of Georgia's top running backs. In fact, here is what Robert Edwards, the great former Georgia running back, said about the conversation that he had with White right after his injury occurred.
I had an opportunity to talk to Zamir last year when the injury occurred. He was a little down, but I think right now, just seeing him the other day, talking to him, he's excited. He's enjoying the process.
Yeah, listen, exciting, enjoying the process. Those are phrases you like to hear. So let me see if I can put a bottom line on all of this. Obviously, this is not a spring story right now because for the most part, Zamir White seems to be pretty limited during practice, only doing some kind of straight line running type stuff during drills, maybe not a whole lot of stuff much more advanced beyond that. But given the circumstantial evidence around White, what Robert Edwards has said there, what Zamir White himself has tweeted, what other whispers you seem to hear pop up from time to time around Athens, I am not counting this guy out by a long shot. And come summer, my guess is you see a lot more of Zamir White during practice. And come fall, especially when Georgia needs him most, in the biggest games it'll play, the impressive Zamir White that we all remember coming out of high school, we may get to see and probably will get to see, likely for sure, we'll see that guy on the field for the Dogs this fall. My name is Brandon Adams. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form wherever you find podcasts, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. By the way, keep that in mind. That's going to be important coming up in just a moment. We're going to talk more about G-Day in just a bit. Before we get to that, though, as I promised off the top of the program, an awesome giveaway from our friends at the Atlanta Braves. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Braves last night, how much fun was it to see the Braves on Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN? That's been kind of the marquee game for a long time. Braves in that spot last night. First time, by the way, at SunTrust Park. And anytime they beat those sneaking Mets, that's always fun. Last night, the Braves did that. 7-3 was the final score there. Braves also about to wrap up the homestand against the Arizona Diamondbacks. But it's the next homestand I want you to keep in mind. Many of you may not be aware of this, but you're going to be excited once I tell you. When the Braves return back to Atlanta again on April 26th, you're going to want to be one of the first 15,000 fans in attendance because that night, it's Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead night. How much fun is this going to be? The Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead. They're going to go fast. You got to get there early to get in line for that. A major event going down on April 26th against the Colorado Rockies as the Braves do a Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead night. Now, I've seen a kind of a speck of the bobblehead. I'm a little bit of a bobblehead connoisseur. This is among the best that I've seen because it's got that great launch angle on the Acuna swing. It's a great-looking bobblehead. And that night, April 26th, 15,000 of these will be given away. But you got to be one of the first in attendance to get one. So you can get tickets for yourself by going to braves.com/tickets. That's braves.com/tickets. Atlanta Braves baseball chop on. Now, let me also say this. As a way of enticing our audience here, in addition to the chance that you go to braves.com/tickets and buy your tickets, the Braves have been nice enough to give us a set of 4 to give away. How much fun is this going to be for that night? These are very good tickets, by the way, for that night against the Rockies, for Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead night. We're giving away 4 tickets for the April 26th game against the Colorado Rockies, and here is how we're going to do it. It's very simple. I'm going to give you a trivia question. In fact, I'll give that to you right now. Speaking of Acuna, it is his bobblehead night coming up on April 26th. He was the most recent Brave to win the National League Rookie of the Year. He won it last year. Before Acuna, who was the last Brave to win National League Rookie of the Year? If you know, here's how you give us the answer. When we post the show today, DawgNation Daily at the world-famous DawgNation.com, in the comments section down at the bottom, please place your answer. And I realize a lot of you are going to have the right answer, and some of you are just going to Google it and copy each other and everything else. That's fine. We're going to take everyone who gives us a correct answer from the world-famous DawgNation.com a bit later on. We'll put all those names in a hat, shake them all up. We'll draw one out. And that'll be the winner of the set of 4 tickets for April 26th on Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead night against the Colorado Rockies. So, once again, the previous Brave before Acuna to win Rookie of the Year, let us know. When we post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com in the comment section, we'll draw out a winner, and you will be the lucky winner to a set of 4 really good tickets for that April 26th game against the Rockies on Ronald Acuna Jr. bobblehead night. That is really fun, and we are really happy to see the Braves playing well and fun having them in SunTrust Park, continuing this homestand, and hope you go to braves.com/tickets for more information on that. All right, before we get chipped hours, let me squeeze in something else here for a moment, and I may have to do some of this now. And then some of this a little bit later on in the program, too. But as we get close to G-Day, I was thinking about this over the weekend. You know, as much as I'll start the show by talking about Zamir White and, DeAndre Swift and Jake Fromm, all the big names on this roster right now, really my excitement level for G-Day is about kind of a different group of players. For whatever reason this spring, I have been really fascinated by the guys who've been on the Georgia roster but haven't played a lot yet, using this spring as a chance to earn that playing time. We've been in Athens a bunch this spring, and when I'm watching, this go on, this to me is the most fascinating part of the entire team right now, because the honest truth is I'm pretty sure Georgia's going to be pretty good this year, a national championship contender, and the guys that ultimately win these starting jobs are going to be very good players. But it's the story of the guys trying to work their way up in alongside these other players that I find to be pretty fascinating right now. I wrote about one of these guys yesterday at DawgNation.com. It's the tight end John Fitzpatrick. He's a guy on G-Day, I don't mind telling you, I'm rooting for. I'm rooting for him as that second tight end alongside Charlie Warner to earn himself some playing time. I like the idea of saying our best option at tight end was a guy we already had on the roster, a 4-star signee who was really eager and excited about coming to Georgia a year ago. And it sounds like Fitzpatrick is making the most of his opportunity right now. No guarantee that he's going to win that starting job or win a lot of playing time, but he's apparently working his way towards at least being in the conversation for some playing time and a name worth watching on G-Day. In fact, here is one of the things that Kirby Smart said about how Fitzpatrick is fitting into that tight end situation when he spoke on Saturday.
I don't know that we'll really know there until the complete – we got Scyther coming too from Tampa, so we've got a big group coming in there, so that'll be – depending on how good those young guys are and if we get anybody else, whether or not they're able to help us, that'll be the key. I'm pleased with Fitz's work. He works really hard. He's blocking big people, and he's having to compete against big people for the first time. Last year, he didn't get to go against those type guys, so he's getting thrown into the fire, and he's competing really hard. 2 walk-ons, Kirby White and Peyton Mercer, are both really competing hard at tight end. Thought they both did a good job today.
So Kirby mentioned Scyther on the way, and then he says if somebody else comes in to help us too. I think he's referencing Eli Wolf there. For whatever reason, he doesn't seem to want to talk about Wolf. He can't talk about him because I don't 100% understand that rule, but Kirby did say that at the beginning of the spring. But nonetheless, that's kind of the situation there. There are guys coming in. This is Fitzpatrick's chance to make a name for himself. Apparently he's doing that. Kirby went into a little bit more detail about just what he's been doing over the last year. And by the way, threw another compliment out to Owen Condon, the offensive tackle. Here's Kirby again.
He's playing tougher. I don't think, he wasn't a guy that played a position that he had to go block people all the time in high school. So now he's having to go in line, block people, flex out, run routes. I think he's in the 240s. He plays really hard, and our weight program has helped him, as it has Owen Condon. Those guys getting to go out there and get some more strength and lift during the season last year on Fridays, that pays off for them now because they're further along because of all the work they did.
So, yeah, like I said before, there's some big names in this Georgia roster. We fixate on those here at DawgNation Daily. But my rooting interest or my curiosity as a fan on G-Day is going to be with a lot of those guys like Fitzpatrick. Can they make a name for themselves? Can they use G-Day as a validation of the work they've done over the last few weeks? There's some more names like Fitzpatrick in that category for me. I'll deal with those later on the program. For now, let's catch up with our buddy Chip Towers.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Fresh off the plane, back from South Bend, Indiana, where he was doing an early look to Georgia's game this September against Notre Dame. It is Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily. Chip will get into the scene in South Bend in a couple of moments. But before that, G-Day is on Saturday. Before you joined me, I was saying that one of the things I'm really curious about, and for whatever reason have been very curious about all spring, some of these guys who haven't played a lot yet at Georgia but fighting and scratching and clawing for their chance at playing time. I'm fascinated by that subplot, that storyline for G-Day on Saturday. When you think about the spring game, you've seen a lot of these over the years. What are you interested in seeing this Saturday?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And spring games are interesting in that regard, and you're drilling down on the key there because, the spring games aren't about Jake Fromm, and they're not about DeAndre Swift in this particular year, or a lot of other guys who have played a lot. The coaches know what they can do, so you want to see those guys because, I'm eager to see what kind of crowd comes out. Georgia always draws better than pretty much anybody around. So I imagine it'll be a huge crowd, and they'll want to get a look at those guys, and Kirby and the staff will offer them a look. But that's not what the game's all about. There's a highly, highly, highly competitive element that's going on in those guys that you mentioned, like John Fitzpatrick and and some of those others just that are a tier below there, the ones that haven't had a chance to play very much. Of course, there's 14 early enrollees, several of them, sidelined with injuries, but, the N'Kobe Deans and Nolan Smiths of the world, you haven't had, despite everything the coaches have seen from them in practice, they have not had the opportunity to play on a stage per se. And this is a stage. It's a significant stage. I was just at Notre Dame, and Brian Kelly and them were talking about it. And there was only 30,000 fans there, but that's what you want to see is how, somebody plays when the lights are on and it's not necessarily a controlled environment. And then the other side of it is you want to get out of there healthy, right? So even those guys like Nolan Smith and N'Kobe Dean, you don't want to see those guys get hurt, so you're not going to push the envelope too much. So the third part of that whole equation is, there's going to be a lot of walk-ons and guys you hadn't heard of, and God bless him, he's really at this point an excellent player. But a lot of Prather Hudson and guys like that, he's going to be carrying the tough load toward the second half toward the end of the game.
Trying to keep up with a lot of the spring games this weekend, I was reminded of something that does kind of make the Georgia spring game a good bit different than a lot of the others. The Auburn spring game, for instance, where, it's number one offense against number two defense and vice versa. A lot of the spring games are like that, where they match up starters versus backups, and that's typically done to make the offense look good. If Georgia continues the trend that it's been under Kirby Smart, that's not what Athens is going to be on Saturday. It's going to be good on good, as they like to say, kind of ones-on-one, starting defense against starting offense. And, the stats may not be quite as overinflated by, virtue of that, but it's a lot more entertaining product for the fans, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I don't have the scores in front of me, but the G-Day games have typically been low scoring since Kirby has been here, and that's the reason. They're competitive. He wants them to be competitive, because otherwise it is just a glorified, exposition. If you go ones versus two and twos versus one, you kind of know how that's going to turn out. I mean, it better turn out a certain way. Your ones better be better than your twos and vice versa. So, yeah, this will be a competitive endeavor. I don't think there's any question about that. And, again, the key is getting out of there healthy and then maybe learning a little bit about that second tier who's going to step up and help you that maybe you weren't sure if they'd be able to.
I talked about Zamir White before you joined us. He had a tweet. I don't think it's news, but I do think it's fun. And, Chip, I guess in a roundabout way, my point on Zamir is I leave the spring more optimistic about what he might be able to do this summer than I started the spring with. Kirby was very cautious in his first press conference, and at the time I wasn't sure if we'd see any of those play polish type drills, the way we saw that from Chubb in his injury recovery season heading to 2016, but we've seen some of that now from White. We've heard some whispers that he might be on track for a recovery. As a fan of White, I want to see him play. I actually feel a little more optimistic about this now than I did. Is your overall takeaway from the spring the same thing?
I agree with you on that. Yeah, I mean, it's really been nothing that Kirby's done or said about it or anything like that. It's just been really, a lot of the highlights that you see that Georgia's IMG crew puts out and things like that, and the brief media observation periods that we have. He's running around pretty good, and it's not, he's doing all the drills. He's getting low, cutting, running over the tackling dummies. The other day at the scrimmage, I saw him catch a pass and then twist and turn to the inside. Putting a move on the defensive back.
Nice.
All that's very, very encouraging. At the same time, they're going to be cautious as all get it. It's not just about whatever you might have and get out of him for this season, not wanting to jeopardize that. But you got to think, especially when it comes to a running back, and especially when it comes to one like Zamir has had two significant knee injuries. You're talking about this guy's livelihood. So you got to be real careful with that. And usually, the biggest detriment in those kind of things is the player themselves. I mean, they want to come out, hey, I feel good, I want to go. I mean, that's what they're going to tell you. So I imagine Ron Corson probably spends a good bit of time sort of pulling the reins on those guys. Saying, "Yep, you look good. Your recovery's great. We're going to hold off. We're going to hold off a little longer." But based on what I've seen this spring, I have no reason to think that he won't be, given a significant opportunity to play in preseason camp and work his way into the rotation for game one. I was pretty skeptical about that at the outset of spring. I'm less skeptical about it now.
I don't condone unsanctioned illegal wagering, but I will say, hypothetically speaking, I did lose a bet to our buddy Connor Riley recently because I told him that I thought that Walter Grant would be back on defense before the spring practice was over. Chip, to my knowledge, that has not happened yet, and I know that you weren't there on Saturday. You were in South Bend for the spring game up there, but Walter Grant was still on the offense. So I'm in a position now where I'm going to double down on this, double or nothing, and say that Grant still plays defense once the season begins. How sure are you of that right now? Is there a chance that Walter Grant's move to offense is permanent?
I don't believe that for a minute. Again, the skepticism meter is pretty high on that. I get it because, look, because of Georgia's situation running back, because of it being spring, and it's sort of like quarterback situation where Jake Fromm could throw every pass you possibly are going to attempt in spring practice, but you don't want his arm to fall off, right? And it's the same thing with running backs. Again, Walter Grant, he hasn't been an all-star for Georgia, but Georgia also knows what they have in him. But what they don't know is what they have in all those young outside linebackers who are coming in to compete at the position. So it makes sense to get Walter Grant over there. He's learning how to play the position, how to run the plays, and he can be a stopgap effort over there in the fall. And then conversely, I think he'll come back on defense at some point and help him out there. We'll have to ask Kirby some more about it this week because he is. I agree with. I probably would have taken that bet as well early in the year, and that's the way most gambling goes for me. I probably would have lost some money.
Well, I know you wrote about Grant last week at DawgNation.com, and go back and look at his time at Cairo, a great program down there. He was a little bit overlooked as a recruit in some respects, but he had some great offers. Florida State, back when that really mattered. Alabama, I believe, was in on Grant for a little bit too. I mean, as you wrote in your piece, this was a really athletic player. I mean, there's so many top-flight athletes on Georgia right now that some are going to get lost in the shuffle, but just how much, Kirby likes to use that phrase, twitchy, quickness, just how much of that Walter Grant has probably gets overlooked from time to time. And I guess, if nothing else, on the offensive side of the ball for this spring, a lot of fans are becoming aware of just how athletic he really is.
Yeah, he's terrific. He's going to help you in a lot of ways. I still think tight end might be a good place for him as well. I mean, he could play anywhere. And, there's been a lot of players like it. Unfortunately, he plays the Sam linebacker position, which is sort of a little bit of a dying breed, a dying position in the game because of all the spread. I mean, you remember years ago, Brandon Miller played for Georgia, a five-star guy, and it just there wasn't many opportunities for him to get out there and showcase his talent. But Walter Grant is a really special guy, and he was a real anomaly when it came to recruiting because it was interesting. He didn't do the whole camp thing back in the day. I remember talking to Coach Dvorsny when I went down there and visited him in Cairo, and he didn't go to the opening. They didn't drive up to Atlanta and go to a lot of the camps that create a lot of that recognition. But believe me, Kirby Smart, who was recruiting him initially as an assistant at Alabama, and those guys at Florida State, and kind of the regional recruiting people all knew who he was, and that's why he had offers from Alabama, Florida State, Florida, Georgia. Yeah, I mean, everybody knew who he was, but he just didn't, really register on the elite recruit scene. I still think the best is ahead of Walter Grant, and at the very least, you're going to see him on every special teams and probably in at least situational work on defense.
Let me, before we get to the what happened in South Bend on Saturday and what you saw there during your time leading up to that great game in September, let me squeeze in one more thing. We haven't heard from you on this. The Indiana State game got canceled in 2023, and I joked here that, in most places that wouldn't seem like news, but for Georgia fans, a canceled game like that it conjures up these questions of, well, who might Georgia play in 2023? What do you think the odds are, Chip, that that game does end up being replaced by one of these major non-conference games? We've heard Oklahoma rumored for a long time. There's even some stuff coming from Norman about maybe that game taking place then. I know Football Scoop had some of that kind of stuff over the over the last week. What are the odds that 2023 for Georgia now also features one of these major non-conference home-and-home type things?
Oh, I think the odds are very, very good at that. I mean, look, and certainly Kirby Smart and Georgia have kind of been out front. Georgia tends to lead when it comes in to a lot of college football trends and whatever that happens to be, and that's the case on scheduling as well. But this is a national initiative to improve these schedules. I think it speaks about a lot of things to come. I don't know how much of a commentary that it ultimately is about possibly an 8-team playoff coming in the future, but because you have a playoff now, it's all about strength of schedule and everything. It's not as much about avoiding a loss during the regular season as it used to be. And between that and the initiative to keep stadiums full, to keep donors happy, and all that kind of stuff, the trend is to go out and get major fun. I think this is great. I think it's wonderful. You're a college football fan, Brandon. I am too. That's why we get in this business.
Yep.
And that's how I grew up. I remember in the 1960s and early 70s, and Georgia playing games with UCLA and Texas A&M, which was out of conference then. And different teams like that coming in to Sanford Stadium. That's what it's all about. Bringing in out-of-region opponents that you don't get a chance to see very often, or that you only seen on TV, and that you otherwise wouldn't get to see unless you got to a postseason bowl game. So, yeah, I think that's definitely that 2023 is going to get filled in by a major opponent. It's going to be an intriguing storyline to follow and see how it turns out.
The 2017 season, both personally and professionally for me, was an unforgettable year, but the single most memorable moment from that year for me was not the Rose Bowl. It was what happened in South Bend. Start of the fourth quarter, when all those lights come up and Georgia plays the Krypton theme that Redco Band does inside Notre Dame Stadium. It was, even now, the kind of thing that gives me chill bumps just thinking about that moment. Chip, I found it really cool last week to read from you at DawgNation.com. The folks in South Bend also remember that as well. Now, they don't remember it as fondly as we do, certainly, but they still have a very vivid memory of that. I will say that it's really nice to know that felt like a big moment for them, because obviously going to South Bend was big for UGA. How else did you find the folks in Notre Dame, both in terms of their memories of what did happen in 2017 and what they expect to happen this September? How much is Georgia currently on their mind?
Well, it's a lot. I mean, Georgia is circled on their schedule big time. Not really for payback as much as it's just like in any other year, like 2017 was. I mean, Brandon, that's probably going to be a matchup of top 5 teams coming in week 4 of the 2019 season. Now, right now, I mean, if you look at the way too early polls, I've seen Notre Dame 6, I've seen them 10, I've seen them 9. I mean, they're right now they're kind of a consensus top 10 pick. Georgia's obviously going to be 4 or 5 or 3, or depending on how it finally turns out. And then so that's in week 4 in 2019, or week 3. I can't remember exactly, but the games that are played before that are mostly of non-consequence. And, Georgia certainly got to open the season at Vanderbilt, and nobody's going to take that lightly. Kirby Smart, at least among them. But the anticipation is you're going to arrive in that game with 2 undefeated teams, likely top 5 teams. You'll have the entire nation, tuning in to watch like they did in 2017. And so, I wrote a retrospective that ran yesterday on DawgNation. You hadn't had a chance to read it, I hope you will, because I was eager to find out what that game felt like for them on that end. And as you would expect, it was a huge game for them. That it was interesting to find out that a lot of the Fighting Irish pointed to that game as really setting them up for the success that they had in 2018, and really some of the success they had the rest of 2019. 2017. They went 10-3 that year. They lost a couple of games late, but as they both came out of that game, when you went into it, you really weren't sure what either one of these teams had. Looking back in 2017, Georgia was coming off a poor year, a first year under Kirby Smart. Notre Dame was coming off an awful year. There were a lot of whispers about Brian Kelly's job, and then you come into that game in the second week of the season, and it goes down to the end. And so as Georgia went on and advanced to the national championship game, Notre Dame continued to look and said, we could have won that daggum game. We had that game right there where we wanted it, and wasn't able to put it away. So they realized when they saw what Georgia did that they were playing on a high level, and then they carried on that through with an undefeated regular season last year and a playoff berth where they got their head handed to them pretty good by Clemson. That's the mentality going into this year. They realize how big the Georgia game is, and they're looking at that as a must-win game, and there's a lot of anticipation about it up there.
I know we're going long here, but I'll just squeeze in one more thing kind of quick. It's kind of funny. If you go back and watch the NBC broadcast from that night, at the beginning of the telecast, it's Herschel Walker and I forget who from Notre Dame, but it was essentially treated as a nostalgia thing that Georgia and Notre Dame, this is a lot like 1980, and it was almost a triviality these two teams were on the field together. And Chip, for reasons that you just mentioned, when they rematch in 2019, it's almost like this went from being kind of a throwback to a bygone era to now it feels like an honest-to-goodness semi-rivalry because Notre Dame did make the playoff last year. Georgia did not. Georgia hopes to do that this year and use Notre Dame as a springboard for that. There was almost no bad blood between these two teams when they played in 2017, but at least to a certain extent, there's going to be a little extra edge to that game in 2019 because they are now both programs on the national stage.
Yeah, and let me tell you one of my takeaways from coming up there, Brandon. I think Notre Dame has rearisen, if that makes sense. Because look, here's some things that have happened since that 2017 game. I mean, right now they're in the final stages of an indoor practice facility that they built, and it's like most anything Notre Dame does. I mean, this place is going to be pretty incredible. I mean, it's going to be. I think approaching $50 million when it's done. They have targeted Atlanta. I had to sit down, and you'll read more about this in DawgNation with Brian Pullian, the son of Bill Pullian, the longtime well-known NFL GM, and he's the recruiting coordinator. And he was talking about how they are hitting Atlanta really hard over and above Florida, which used to be a big area. I mean, Notre Dame recruits nationally, and it's not that they're coming for Georgia, okay? Because the recruiting is a little bit different down there, but it's that they can find what they need in an Atlanta. They're not necessarily trying to beat out Georgia on the top players, but they can come down here and find the high academic, high elite caliber athlete that they recruit at Notre Dame, and so they got 3 new signees on the roster out of Atlanta, all of them 4-star guys, at least 2 of them heavily recruited by Georgia. And so, I anticipate Notre Dame being a player on the national stage for the foreseeable, near future at the very least. I think Brian Kelly and them have it going on a little bit now, and Notre Dame is a brand that, let's face it, everybody recognizes. So I think they're going to be a player here for the next few years. It'll be interesting to see if Georgia can get them back on the schedule in the not-too-distant future as well.
All right, Chip, great stuff. Appreciate your coverage there at DawgNation.com. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you and talking to you here on DawgNation Daily again very soon.
Okay. See you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, fun to have Chip Towers on the program. A lot of SEC spring games from the weekend. I want to get to those coming up as part of our SEC Through. Before that, though, let me remind you about something. We got a great event coming up on Wednesday. I hope you will be with us for that. We are back again at Marlowe's in Dunwoody for our DawgNation spring game preview at Marlowe's. It's starting at 6 p.m. this Wednesday. That's Wednesday, April 17th. Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Our buddy John Stinchcombe is going to be there. I love John. John's great to talk football with. John's got a lot of thoughts on what's going to happen on G-Day. He can look back on his own memories of G-Day. David Green told us a great story about his recollection of the 2002 G-Day game when he was with us last week. I wonder if John kind of thinks about it the same way. We'll find out that from him. But We haven't been at Marlowe's in a while. I know a lot of you have been saying, when are we going to do another one? Well, the answer is this Wednesday, 6 to 8 p.m., Marlowe's in Dunwoody, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway, with a John Stinchcomb right here on right here. It's going to be a lot of fun. Cannot wait for that. All of you in the DawgNation Daily area, anybody that can kind of get over to Marlowe's in Dunwoody on Wednesday, we appreciate that. I know many of you making plans to come in from out of town. We'll look forward to seeing you there this Wednesday at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. That's going to be a ton of fun. All right, I have got to, and I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can, I'm going to run through a bunch of stuff from the SEC spring games of the weekend, and then I'll probably do kind of a longer breakdown of each of these SEC teams at the end of the spring. There was one thing I forgot to put on our rundown, our show sheet, so I apologize to the folks who help us be on the air every day, Michael and Connor. My prediction about the Florida spring game could not have been more true. If I was wise, I'd play the audio that I said on Friday. Did I not? Did I not say on this show that Florida has a habit of doing fake, phony stuff during a spring game, like the Felipe Franks touchdown run from a year ago? They will do something contrived, something fake. It's like a pro wrestling thing for the Florida spring game. That happened. It happened exactly as I said it would. Did you see the former Gator, Lito Shepherd, on the field? First of all, this is what Florida does for its spring games. They bring out former players and have them take snaps. The former Gator, Lito Shepherd, on the field, gets an interception, and then was allowed to return it back for a touchdown. Can you imagine Kirby Smart? Can you imagine if I knocked on his door at the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall and said, Coach, I got an idea. What if we let fill in the blank, Terry Hogue, line up at defensive back on Saturday, and what if we do a thing where Hogue takes a pick back for a touchdown? Can you imagine what Kirby Smart, the look he'd have on his face to me and to anyone who suggested that? Kirby's all about competition. I'm so glad. That's what I want my coach doing. I want good on good. I don't want guys out of the retirement wing coming over and, getting one more chance at glory at the Swamp. I hope Lito Shepherd donated a bunch of money for Dan Mullen, let him doing that. Mullen is a clown. Kirby's a coach, and there's a reason why the cocktail party's been going the way that it's been going the last couple of years. With that said, kind of rapid fire style here, I saw where Nick Saban admitted after the Alabama spring game on Saturday he's dealing with a hip issue. Now, he was mostly joking about this, but he is going to be gone for a while. My guess is this means we won't see Saban at the Regions Celebrity Pro-Am, which is the PGA Tour Champions event that Saban typically plays in. My guess is he will not be teeing it up in that, so that may be the only public instance we have of noticing Saban being injured with his hip. I will say I couldn't help but notice, and honesty compels me to admit, that Saban, in the midst of talking about this, made a very specific point of saying, I want to coach for a long time, and then blah, 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 blah. Because, let's face it, there's already a lot of cracks about Saban and his age anyway. Some of those admittedly do come from me. Although I did not say anything on Twitter about this, so I feel like I at least get some credit for taking the high road on that. But nonetheless, Saban does not want any jokes about old people breaking hips and things along those lines. So this is going to be one of those deals, much like his hair, which he has splattered with paint for the last 30 years. My guess is that privately he's probably a little bit sensitive about this subject, but he is dealing with a hip injury right now. Then a couple more things, as we have way more content. We have show remaining to cover. Gus Malzahn on Saturday. I'm kind of a dork, so I go back and watch a lot of these press conferences. Malzahn, by the media, was only asked about two quarterbacks. He was asked about Joey Gatewood. He was asked about Bo Nix. So, I mean, to me, there you have it. We said this last week. It certainly seems like right now Gatewood and Nix are the two quarterbacks competing for that job. I did notice that Matthew Hill, who I think is a good wide receiver and a guy that you're actually going to probably be hearing from a little bit at Auburn, that may be one of the few examples in the SEC right now of one that may have gotten away from Georgia. Hill out of Brookwood High School was talking about how deep he thinks the Auburn wide receiver core is, and he kind of compared this to the Clemson situation, the Alabama situation, where he said they have like one main receiver. If only that were the case, Georgia's life would be a whole lot easier, because there's a lot more than Jerry Jeudy at Alabama. There's a lot more than Justin Ross at Clemson. There's T. Higgins, for instance. There's Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith and all those. So I don't expect Hill to know every player in college football, but that was kind of an odd comment. And then a couple more things. I saw where Jarrett Garantano for Tennessee threw 4 touchdowns in his spring game. He didn't make a big deal about that after the game, but honestly, I mean, I don't think the Jim Chaney offense for the Vols this year is going to be awful. I don't know that Tennessee as a team is going to be very good. I don't know that the offense is going to be awful. A lot of you don't want to hear that. You don't want me to say that. But, I mean, I do think that Chaney's probably an upgrade for Tennessee offensively. I don't know that 4 touchdowns from Garantano means that in a spring game, but it kind of fits in with that discussion. I did not see the A&M game on Friday, but I did hear Jake Calzada, the freshman that Georgia made a late push with towards signing day. I heard he played okay. Kelly Bryant, as expected, I think played pretty well for Missouri on Saturday. And then one more thing to get into, and we'll do this like in a couple of seconds. I saw where Will Wade was reinstated as LSU basketball coach. I don't have a problem with this. At this point, college basketball is kind of a mess. Wade's back. LSU's going to get beaten up over this, but ultimately, I'm not sure it really matters all that much. We'll make that your SEC through. Okay, so I want to talk Diamond Dogs here to close out the program. Before that, let me go back to where I was a little earlier when we ran out of time. I was saying a simple point, that my thing about the G-Day game, while we're going to get fixated on the big names and those superstar players and those maybe all-American candidates, a fascination for me this spring has been those guys working their way towards getting a chance to compete. And I referenced John Fitzpatrick, who I wrote about yesterday at DawgNation.com. I think another guy that fits in that conversation is linebacker Nate McBride. I'd love to see McBride have a moment on Saturday during G-Day. And when you heard him talk last week, I think you got another indication of just how much of a fan favorite he really is and why that is the way that it is. First of all, Georgia fans like Nate McBride, but what we found out from McBride is that he himself is also still very much a Georgia fan and still very much enjoying his time in Athens. Here's part of what McBride said then.
I'm still having fun here. I love this place. I love the guys I'm around. I've grown very close to them, and if I need somebody to talk to, they're going to talk to me. So it's nice having that.
This is number 6 linebacker in the country from the class of 2017. Hasn't played a ton yet, but he says, I love my time at Georgia. Folks, I know there's some snarky comments sometimes about how much attention McBride gets despite not having played very much. When you hear him say things like that, I think you get an indication of why he is so popular. And I'll tell you, hearing him speak this week, I think the popularity he has is justified. He seems like a really good guy, and he's really proud of how deep his position is at Georgia. Does not seem to fret too much with the 5-star guys who've come in as of late. If anything, he takes that as a source of pride. Here's more from McBride.
It's crazy, especially with Channing's here and Quay's here and Nakobe just got here. Those are all 3 great players. I mean, that's some of the best players I've ever been around. And I don't know, it's fun competing. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. So it's all apart from your work ethic and how you prepare off the field and how you perform on the field.
I hope Nate McBride has a G-Day moment on Saturday. I like him. I like what he says there. How can you not appreciate that attitude? And wouldn't it be great to see him get a chance to make a play in front of a big crowd on Saturday? Offensively, another guy that's kind of that discussion for me. I mentioned Fitzpatrick. I mentioned McBride. I'll add Matt Landers in this group. Georgia players really like Matt Landers. Kirby praised him again on Saturday for having made a couple plays during the scrimmage. The week before that, he went into a little bit more detail about some of the things that Landers is doing right now. Here's what Kirby said then.
Matt Landers had some drops and was frustrated with Matt, and then all of a sudden Matt made a couple really good plays. So, again, that's some of the inconsistencies we need to be consistent to get where we need to go. We're looking for wide receivers to step up, and he made a couple really good plays, but the average play you should make every day, he had a couple of those he didn't. So we need him to grow up. For us to be a good offensive football team, we've got to have vertical outside threats. I think Tyler and JJ are playing well, but it's not going to be done just by them. So the Matt Landers, the Trey Blunts, the Kieris Jacksons, all those guys have really got to step up. D-Rob, they've got to step up to make us dangerous on offense.
Yes, I mean, I'd love to see Landers have that moment. We've heard a lot about him. Much the same way that Stetson Bennett was popular as the Georgia scout team quarterback. I mean, Landers has been kind of that level of popularity with many of the Georgia players as well. Another guy that Kirby Smart mentions right there is also Trey Blunt. Blunt's a guy that I'm rooting for on Saturday. He's a guy we saw play a decent amount in 2017. Didn't see as much of last year. I'd love to see Blunt, who's a high school teammate of Jamari Salyer and Andrew Thomas. I'd love to see him have another big-time G-Day moment. I think that'd be fun. Notori Johnson's an example of that for me on the defensive side of the ball. Another one of these guys that was a part of that heralded 2017 class, but, has had a little bit of a difficult time finding a home on the field for UGA, but showed no ego and a willingness to compete by switching sides of the ball and going and playing on defense. I don't know how much of a factor he is right there now, but But I'd love to see him have that moment. So as we start thinking about G-Day on Saturday, that's one of the things that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about some of these guys we've heard about, wondered about, but haven't seen a ton of. I hope they get their chance to do it in front of a crowd on Saturday. By the way, I'll also tell you this, 898 days, 898. That's how long it's been since those Loudies, these stinking Gators have beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, it is time now for R.S. Andrews Cool Down, your chance to talk to us about anything you want from today's program. Really like the Zamir stuff off the top. I thought that was really fun. I am rooting for a lot of these guys on G-Day. That's one of the things that's on my mind right now for whatever reason. Just a lot of these guys that I just hope they get their chance. Because when you hear Fitzpatrick talk, you realize, we had him at a Marlowe's event last year. This is a Georgia fan. In addition to a Georgia player, this is a Georgia fan. You hear McBride talk. In addition to being a Georgia player, this is a Georgia fan. We had Notori Johnson at a Marlowe's event a couple of years ago, and the excitement that Notori had at that time for coming into Georgia was contagious. And I think it says something in this modern age, this age of, I'm gonna just cut and run if the first sign of something bad happens to me. The fact that these guys are sticking with it and fighting and scratching for their opportunity. And there's still plenty of football to be played for all these guys. They may very well get their chance, and many of them are going to make good on that opportunity. The fact they're choosing to do that speaks well of them individually. I think it also says something nice about Georgia. The roster is made up of a large number of players who are contributing a positive element to the team chemistry. I think that's really good and really important. You can't have 85 guys all shopping for the next best opportunity. You've got to have some guys who are in it for the long haul. And the names I just mentioned so far have shown examples of being just that. All right, let me run and get some comment. Alton McGurk mentions another one, Tommy Bush. He says, no word on Tommy Bush and how he's been progressing. So Kirby has mentioned Bush briefly this spring, but I would say that Landers has been talked about a bit more than Bush has. You can do with that what you will. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, because a lot of these times these are just anecdotal comments. In some cases, they could be almost pulled out of context. So I don't know that we know one way or another on Bush right now, but it's fair to say that, and on Saturday it was an example. Really, the last two Saturdays, unsolicited, Kirby brought up Landers. So we might take that to mean that Landers is a little bit ahead of Bush right now. Dustin Avant mentioning some of the other spring games. Yeah, I guess you had both former Georgia quarterbacks playing in spring games over the weekend. Willie Gray Jr. combating me and what I said before about having the old players in the field for Florida. He says, I will say it would be kind of cool to see Fromm throw a bomb to A.J. Green. Yeah, listen, I wouldn't mind that. I used to joke and say that back in a previous era, spring games weren't quite as interesting because you didn't have as many good players in the field. I thought it'd be kind of fun to see Georgia try to recreate great moments of the past. For instance, like the P44 Haynes play that Verron Haynes scored to beat Tennessee. The play runs up on the video board, and then Georgia has to quickly huddle. This is a terrible idea. They have to quickly huddle and get in the formation and try to run the great play from Georgia games past. You could do the Michael Johnson touchdown against Auburn. You could do, the Ballou to Scott play. And, of course, the defense also getting a chance to defend against this, too. I will not, obviously, I'll admit that's not a very good idea, but it is an idea that I've had in the past. By the way, let me also remind you, our friends at R.S. Andrews bring the R.S. Andrews Cool Down to you. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical, they do it all for you. They can do it for you. Find them online at rsandrews.com. So this time of year, that air conditioning, you try to flip it on, it's not working the way you want it to. You want that house to cool down. Well, R.S. Andrews, they cool us down here on DawgNation Daily every day, and they can do that for your home as well. So please find them online at rsandrews.com. Todd David Brown says defensive line recruiting. Yeah, that's the question of the hour. We'll certainly talk to Jeff tomorrow about the fact that the Zamir White commitment date is set, and I don't think it looks good right now. Jimmy Hoskins says, BA follow the visits. What's the word on Brzee, Murphy? Any of them be at G-Day? I guess I don't expect Brzee or Murphy to be at G-Day. Connor, is that your thought, too, that neither Brzee or Murphy are likely to be there?
Brzee, I'm unsure on. Murphy, when we spoke to him at the opening last month, he didn't sound like he was 100% sure whether or not he was going to be at Georgia for G-Day, but he was planning on being there in May.
So there you have that. I think at this point right now, I think it does not look great for either one of those guys, and I think the Brzee thing, just given the date, and we'll let Jeff tell you more about this later on, I just think that's not a great situation right now for a player that I really would have liked to have seen Georgia get. Sean Doyle says, how many 1,000-yard rushers do you think we will have this year? I think at least 2, and my hope is, and I said this a lot, that 2,400, 2,500-yard number is a magic number for me. I want to see that from 2 guys, meaning I need more than 1,000. I got to have one guy get like 13 and one guy get like 11. I need that from a tandem of Georgia running back. And then I need another guy to drop in about a 500-yard total or so. Now, there is a chance this year, just because of the way the talent's distributed, you may have 3 guys who do like 800 yards or something along those lines. And, I guess that's, kind of gets you where you want to go as well. You may not have the perfect pecking order 1, 2, and 3 the way that Georgia seemingly has had the last couple of years. Either way, that's fine. Gerald Harmon says, wow, we lost Murphy in our own backyard. Now, that's not me reporting. That's just me reading tea leaves. So please don't take that as me telling you that I know for sure what Murphy or Brzee, either one, are going to do. That's not my deal, but I don't feel great about either guy right now. Don't feel great at all.
There's still a long way to go with the Murphy recruitment. He's planning an early August decision.
Yeah.
George, I know things don't look great right now. Long way to go.
And
long way to go.
If you could get Murphy, I'd feel better about losing Brzee. Even though it seems like from a position standpoint, Brzee may be a little bit more of exactly what Georgia needs. I think Georgia may not need Murphy. They could certainly use him. And so I'd really like to be able to do that. This is also one of those things, too, where, some people get mad if you're always sunshine and rainbows, and some people get mad if they feel like you're doom and gloom. When it comes to the defensive line situation, the truth for me is somewhere in the middle. I'm not going to come here and tell you that Georgia's getting everybody it wants at that position. Right now, it's not. And I have to admit, I think that the fact that, and I love Trent Thompson as a player. I love Trent Thompson. But the fact that Thompson came in as the nation's number 1 player and doesn't leave Georgia by getting drafted, I think that hurts Georgia a bit. I just do. And that's not me disparaging Trent. I think that Trent, did a lot of really good things in a Georgia uniform. And, I'm proud to have had him in Athens, Georgia. But that story, I do believe, is a little bit of a anvil around the neck of Georgia's defensive line recruiting right now. I just do. And as it stands right now, I think that Georgia is trying to work its way back into the good graces of some of these guys that want to believe that Georgia's the kind of program that can get them to the NFL. Now, we were saying the same thing about wide receiver around the time that, Georgia was missing out on Jaden Hazelwood and some of the other guys that were departing the program. And then, Dominic Blaylock has been talked up a bunch by Kirby Smart as of late, and Georgia got George Pickens, who y'all know that I'm very excited about. So these things are fluid. These situations can change quickly. This is one for me that does need to change because right now I don't think it's where it needs to be. Brenton Guthis gives, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Brenton, gives us a nice breakdown of how those running back yards may go. He says Swift at 12, Harrion at 9, Zeus and Cook at 6. I probably need a little bit more from Swift and a little bit more from Harrion. I mean, I think that Harrion can very well be a 1,000-yard rusher for Georgia this year. I think that Swift hopefully can be healthy enough to get to that 13, 14 number. Now, is there a big difference in 100 yards here or there? Maybe not, but you got to draw the line somewhere, and I'm going to draw the line a little higher than that. So, there is that. As far as between Zeus and Cook, one of those guys this year is probably going to end up being disappointed just because, the number 4 back's not going to get as many carries. He'll get some, but not as many. We shall see. Hiko Moon says, which one's going to start sooner between Nolan Smith and Nakobe Dean? It's a really good question. One of my predictions that I'm kind of working off of right now is that by the end of G-Day, I think we may head into a summer situation where Nolan Smith is among the most talked about guys in this Georgia roster. Now, Nakobe may be very well, too. He may be that as well. But I think the hype train for Nolan Smith is about to leave the station. And I think we may see some examples of that of G-Day. We'll be tackling quarterbacks to the ground because they won't do that. but he may be flying all over the ballpark on Saturday, and everybody may be noticing it. Kirby Smart may be talking about it. I think we may leave Saturday where on programs like this, one of the 3 or 4 most mentioned names on the roster may end up being Nolan Smith.
The Nolan Smith hype train is it's getting very full very quick, and there might not be a lot of room left on it.
Slide to the middle because there are some folks trying to get a seat. Yeah. So slide to the middle if you're already on it.
I mean, I wrote about this last week, and this is before Kirby brought him up again on Saturday. He is, I think, unquestionably one of the quote-unquote winners of the spring practice period so far, just, in terms of the impression. And, he's had an opportunity here with Georgia's outside linebacker group, not being at full strength this spring, and it certainly seems that he's made the most of it so far.
CrowKing123 on YouTube says, I can see Dean and Nolan both start. Certainly it's a chance for both those guys, but if Nakobe Dean becomes the starter at inside linebacker, I mean, you heard what McBride said a moment ago. It's Channing Tindall, it's Quay Walker, it's he mentions also Dean there as well. But just given what's a year older than Dean, if Dean leaps ahead of Tindall, that is one of the most impressive position battle wins that I think we've ever seen at Georgia. I don't know how often. I don't even know that Tindall right now would be the starter. Maybe Tay Crowder and Monty Rice as those 2 linebackers in most formations. But if Dean were to get ahead of Tindall in the linebacking core, I'm not quite so sure how many position battles we've seen someone perform better in to beat out a guy like Tindall, who I think can have a really good year. I think that outside linebacker is open enough that, just given a lot of the things that have gone on with that position group, that Nolan winning the outside linebacker competition is probably not as impressive as Dean if he earns significant playing time over the group that's there. As good as Nakobe Dean might be, that would still be, I think, an amazing situation to beat out those guys who are a little older, because the Roquan Smith example shows us that, to a certain extent, experience does matter at that position.
Yeah, and, I mean, there are countless, Sony Michel didn't play a lot as a freshman. There are countless examples of guys who came in at talented positions who just, it was hard for them to find their way on the field. Jamari Sawyer was at a loaded offensive line group. You gave him a full season, a full offseason to get into it, and he's, another, I think, pretty unquestioned winner from this spring period so far.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably pretty true as well. G-Day 2 p.m. on Saturday. Some folks asking about that in the YouTube comment section. Cody Ledoux on the idea that Brzee might or might not regret going to Clemson. I mean, listen, I'm obviously a Georgia partisan, but I'm not going to tell you that the Clemson experience is not a good one for a lot of people who go there, and it's been seemingly really good to be a part of Brent Venables' defense. I'm not going to, I sometimes half kiddingly, half serious say that there is a need to negatively recruit Clemson right now, but on the other side of that discussion, Clemson also as a program does kind of recruit itself. So I'm sure if Brzee ends up going to Clemson, I'm sure he'll be very happy with his choice. I think, though, there's a chance that by the time that Brzee leaves Clemson, it does not look as a superior program to Georgia, but guys like Brzee and Red and Black would make that truth a lot easier to come to pass. Let me go over here and get a few more YouTube. Colby Curry, in the subject of guys you're rooting for, just want to see, says, I want to see Matt Landers. With his frame, he could make Georgia deadly this year, split him, JJ out wide, and let D-Rob kill the seams. Yeah, I mean, because he does have that little bit of size and because he does seem to have a penchant, at least based on what we've been told, for going up and getting it, Landers would be a really fun one. To see do some big things. Eric Seeger-Smith says if Auburn had Georgia's offensive line, they would be in the playoff conversation. I think that if you gave Georgia's offensive line to a lot of teams, you would change the fortunes for that team. Almost certainly you could find an extra win. You might find 2 extra wins. So I don't think that's an incorrect statement to say you can make a good team much better by adding Georgia's offensive line, which is one of the things that I think speaks to the importance of what Georgia's offensive line can hopefully do for UGA this year. And, as we've said, it's not just those 5 starters because, let's face it, a lot of teams have quality starters. It's what happens after those injuries occur. An offensive line, more times than not, you're going to have the occasional injury pop up. But Georgia seems to be in pretty good shape to be able to withstand some of those injuries, and that's even more fun when it comes to some of that kind of stuff. Fred Davidson, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. That means more to me than you will ever know, Fred. Thank you very much. Speaking of offensive line, Cliff Payne also says, Sam Pittman proved UGA can kill it at any other position. I don't want to hear any more excuses why we aren't elite on the defensive line. So, Cliff, I understand that sentiment. I've expressed a similar sentiment that the defensive line recruiting for Georgia has to be on par with the other position groups. But we see examples of how other groups have kind of risen to that example. I mean, go back and look at what we used to say about the wide receiver recruitment. Not only did Georgia finish off its 2019 recruitment with wide receivers really strong, when you think about 2020 receivers, now, I don't know who these guys that Georgia gets and doesn't get. Sometimes it's even a little bit hard to tell who Georgia's even really targeting. But you do hear Cortez Hankton's name come up now a lot on the recruiting trail in a way that a year or two maybe you didn't, and maybe you worried about how that position was viewed at Georgia. I think the defensive line does need to improve from a recruiting standpoint, but there's plenty of evidence to suggest that will happen and may be in the midst of happening right now. Brazee is a loss. If Brazee chooses a school other than Georgia, that's an L for Georgia. You've got to call it like it is. That's just a fact. But it's not the only big recruit that Georgia's going to have a chance to compete for. And eventually, I think that Georgia is going to remove, if that's a hole in the resume, I think they're going to close in that hole at some point.
Sometimes in recruiting you just get beat. Georgia, even as well as they recruited in the 2018 class, in the 2019 class, there were some battles they lost. Chip was at Notre Dame this weekend. Guy they really wanted was Kyle Hamilton, a safety out of the Atlanta area, and he ended up going to Notre Dame. You as much as we talk about it, you can't, and as well as Georgia's done, Georgia's not going to be like Rob Stark on the battlefield. You can't win every battle.
A nice Game of Thrones reference. The other thing, too, is the challenge with defensive line recruiting is when it comes to the truly elite names, there are just not that many of them. I mean, it seems like a couple years lately we've had even fewer than normal. For instance, a couple years ago, I don't think there was a 5-star defensive lineman in the entire country. So you have these years where there's just not that many elite defensive linemen, so that means the individual recruiting battles at that position are more, I guess, intensified than other positions because there's no one to turn to if you don't get this big elite name in some cases. And, Connor, I'll invite you to weigh in on something I said before. I've got great respect for Trent Thompson. I got not a bad word to say about him, but the fact that he came into Georgia as the number one player and Georgia could not get him drafted, I think right now that's used against UGA just a little bit.
I will push back on that, saying I don't know how much of that is Georgia's fault and how much of that is also putting some stuff on Trent. He obviously shouldn't have left early. I believe that at the time. And, he ended up not getting drafted. And then there was the, I guess, medical incident he had during from going from his sophomore year to his junior year. There were some off-field.
And credit to him for fighting back through that as well as he did.
But, I don't know how much of that you can really put on Georgia. And he was a productive player when he was here.
But I know you know this. Something doesn't have to be true for it to be used.
Yeah.
And that may be an example of that in this situation. Sean Doyle says, what's your prediction for the number of attendees for the G-Day game? The largest so far is Nebraska with 85,946. I don't believe Georgia gets 85 grand. I don't think it's going to be – I hate to say this. I don't think they get close to 85 on Saturday.
Is 70,000 close to 85? Because that's, I think, what my official prediction
is. That's about what I'm thinking, too. It's not 45 or 50. It's 70. Now, if they get 70, they can say 85 because visually
Alabama said 62 and it did not look like 62
I saw one picture of their spring game, maybe it was very early on. That stadium looked mostly empty. So if you've got people sitting in most sections, you'll be able to say you had a bigger number than you really do because think about this. Most of Sanford Stadium are those aluminum bleachers. So on a regular fall Saturday when the stadium's completely full, people are crammed in there to the point they are touching each other and squeezed together like this. I mean, a lot of y'all will say it's actually kind of an uncomfortable experience, especially for people like me who've been overserved when it comes to lunch and dinner. It can be a little bit of a tight situation. Well, if those rows just aren't quite as full, what people do is they spread out, right? All of a sudden now they're sitting a little bit more of a wider stance and they kind of got a little bit of a room between them. It's a more comfortable experience. But if you're looking up from the press box looking down or like the overhead blimp shot or whatever it'll be, to kind of see inside the stadium, that's a lot fewer people because everybody's sort of spread out. But to the naked eye, it's actually not going to look that different.
Right.
So you can You can exaggerate the attendance total if people just spread out and take a little bit more room. And so it may be 70, announced as 85 because it kind of looks full. And ultimately, I guess that's all that really matters. I think what makes Georgia's game different than some of these others that have been played, including the Nebraska game, and Nebraska has a pretty good history of well-attended spring games. I think one of the things that makes the Georgia game a little bit different, come to find out, this day before Easter is a little bit of a challenge for some people. I just did not realize that was going to be such a thing, but, there are people that got, Easter egg hunts and family in town. To come to find out the day before Easter is a little bit of a deal for some people, so there's that anyway. Matt Rukavina says the Florida crowd was not good. I didn't see that. I heard the Tennessee crowd wasn't great. I saw the picture of the Alabama crowd. It did not look good. Yeah.
Going back to the whole Brizzy, the Brizzy Murphy kind of discussion, I thought Chris Brantham in our Facebook comment section had a very smart comment, putting, I think right now, a little bit of why there's this, Clemson is able to get these great defensive linemen, these great edge rushers, these great guys on the interior, is a little bit because of the system they play, and they play one where they put a lot of emphasis on their defensive linemen making plays, whereas at Georgia, and, this has been true, a little bit longer, even going back to the Rick days when they were running the 3-4 defense with Jeremy Pruitt and Todd Grantham to an extent, they put the playmaking onus on their outside linebackers and inside linebackers, which is why you see guys like Roquan Smith, Leonard Floyd. I think DeAndre Walker is a guy who's going to be a very good NFL player. Those guys go to the league, and that's why Georgia's recruited. Again, other than offensive line, inside linebacker and outside linebacker, they've recruited better than anybody. But because of the scheme fit, and I think that scheme fit specifically when it comes to Murphy is maybe why he trends a little bit more to Clemson than Georgia. I do think that scheme plays a small-ish role in all of it. And I thought it was a really good comment by Chris.
Can I go on like a mini rant just for a second?
You can.
There's a certain part of this discussion that I think is total, for lack of a better phrase, just BS.
Poppycock.
And I'll give you kind of an analogy. I'm a golf fan. A lot of people watch the Masters on over the weekend. The whole equipment conversation in golf is exactly the same way. A lot of people want to buy the really expensive golf balls, like a Titleist Pro V1, because they see the PGA Tour golfers using them. And the assumption becomes those are the best golf balls because those are the ones that everybody uses. There's versions of this for clubs and everything else too. All of a sudden, the equipment gets a brand attached to it because the good players use it. Y'all, I don't believe the equipment's actually better. I think if I gave you a bucket of balls from Walmart or whatever, big box retailer you use, or a bunch of Titleist Pro V1s that come in the nice slick packaging in the sleeve inside the box. If I gave you both balls, I don't think the average golfer, you included, is going to play better with the Titleist Pro V1. I also think the same thing is true when it comes to college football. That Clemson right now has this brand of, this is a really good place for defensive linemen. It is viewed as a good place for defensive linemen because good defensive linemen have gone there. And
chicken or the egg.
Completely. And Georgia's about to take advantage of this for a long time. Georgia's RBU. I love Georgia being RBU, but Georgia's not the place that you should go because Herschel Walker went there. I mean, that's a cool thing. And if you like history, that's a nice thing to do.
If you're a running back, you should come to Georgia because Georgia is one of the most running dominant teams in the country.
That's true. But it's also the reason why it runs the ball as much as it does because it's had good running backs. Good players create the systems they play, and it's not the other way around. So right now, Georgia is suffering a little bit from the absence of a brand when it comes to its defensive line. I mentioned the issue with Trent Thompson not getting drafted. I mean, how many defensive linemen from Georgia, true, honest-to-goodness defensive linemen, how many defensive linemen in recent years have been drafted from UGA? That's going to be used against Georgia a bit, but if Georgia was winning on the recruiting trail with these guys right now, that facet would change in a heartbeat. So a lot of this kind of stuff is branding issues. And when you got the brand, you use it to your advantage, and Georgia does that at a number of positions. And once a guy like Trayvon Walker breaks through and some of these other guys, all of a sudden Georgia's going to have that on its side and say, hey, we're the place to be for defensive linemen. Well, that's only true because good players came through there. And so I'm not sure what you do with all that, but, there is a certain extent to this whole recruiting narrative of where you want to go that it's just not empirically true.
I will push back a little bit. So, like, Ceylon Farrell, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence was a top 5 recruit. But, a lot of these Clemson guys were not the mega names when they were recruiting. Now, that's obviously changed a lot in recent history. I mentioned Dexter Lawrence. I mentioned KJ Henry was a 5-star defensive end outside linebacker. He would have been an outside linebacker if he had gone to Georgia, but he's a defensive end at Clemson. That is something that's very recently turned for Clemson, and it helps when you win 2 straight titles. But Clemson's recruiting, I'm having a hard time remembering if anyone has benefited more from one particular win than Clemson in terms of like recruiting and perception of the program than Clemson has from just their absolute destruction of Alabama. In this recent national title.
You're right, and really, to a certain extent, they used that in 2016. They've gotten some momentum from the playoff appearances, but Clemson clearly has a cachet right now that Georgia's got to deal with. Let me get a few other comments, and this has been about our best day for comments in quite some time. Justin Fisk had a funny line about he says Easter's on Sunday. Easter's not a Saturday thing; it's a Sunday thing, which Justin I kind of thought too. But he goes on to say that some of you quote-unquote top fans need to make sure you're inside Sanford Stadium on Saturday earning your top fan status. Speaking of that, I got a great meme sent to me on Twitter about the whole top fan status thing. I think tomorrow we may show that on the program because it was really funny. Really, really funny stuff. We'll do that. Alan Verbanchik also mentioned a good point that when it comes to winning a national championship, stopping the run is really critical towards being able to do that. And y'all, Georgia was no better than above average when it comes to stopping the run a year ago. It's really eye-opening to go back and look at those stats, both in terms of the old school stat, just in terms of total rushing yards allowed. Georgia was outside the top 30. When it comes to the more advanced metrics of like run stop efficiency and a little bit more heavy-duty calculations and tabulations, Georgia was outside the top 50. This was not a good run-stopping team a year ago, at least in terms of the elite national conversation. So that's got to be better this year for sure. And it's really kind of surprising to think that Georgia, who was mostly thought of as a good team last year, that's one area where pretty consistently throughout the year, Georgia was not great at stopping the run. Not great. Sean Doyle says, will we ever see a bruiser safety like Greg Blue? For those of you who are a little too young to remember Greg Blue, who was an All-American at Georgia in 2005, what he did in a college uniform would not be allowed today. Like
college or pro uniform.
Yeah, college or pro uniform. Like Greg Blue was. I don't mean to be condescending. Are you old enough to remember Greg Blue?
The short answer is no. He was a little bit before, like when I really got into college football. But I'm well versed enough in Georgia to know that he was just a walking car crash. On the field.
Thomas Davis did a lot of this, but Greg Blue was such a separator. He separated humans from the football, humans from their helmet. He led with his head. He was just the toughest guy in the world. A fun guy to watch. Twitter would explode now if Greg Blue did one thing in a game that he used to do a full game of way back then.
You made an extended golf analogy earlier. I feel like we've reached the point of the show. We got to at least talk about the Masters yesterday.
So I was obviously thrilled by it. First of all, it's kind of cool to see red and black, getting cheered in the state of Georgia. That brings up positive memories. I historically have not been a big Tiger fan, but I draw a parallel between he and Michael Jordan. There's so many similarities between Tiger and Jordan. But much the same way growing up, having watched all of Jordan in his prime, I became a bigger fan of him the later his career went on. Watching Tiger yesterday, I did really root for him in a way that I've never rooted for him in a tournament before. I'm not anti-Tiger. I'm just not as pro-Tiger as some people are. But this was one of the great sporting events to watch. When you're in your 40s, seeing an athlete succeed in his 40s, there is something really important about that. It's probably a much bigger deal to me because I am older than many of you who are younger. Augusta National could not have looked more beautiful. It could not have been more fun. It is really hard to create a sporting event more enjoyable than what the Masters was for me over the last 4 days. It was just very well done.
Regardless of Tiger winning, this was an all-timer Masters where you had, I think, at one point in the afternoon, 4 or 5 different guys tied for the lead at -12, and it looked like really anybody could win.
Yeah.
I am old enough to remember Tiger's last U.S. Open win. I think it's one of the great sporting achievements. The U.S. Open win is one of the great sporting achievements of my life.
Mm-hmm. When he was hurt, basically.
Yeah, he played, I think, roughly 70 holes on a torn ACL.
Rocco Mediate was a great opponent that day because he's got a good personality.
I've rooted for Tiger because I want to see him get back up and win again, and I probably won't be as pro Tiger going forward because when I watch golf, or when I watch golf, I don't really have guys. I root for whoever is on the leaderboard to just tank. Whoever is at the top of the leaderboard to just tank.
I'm kind of like that with the NCAA tournament. Yeah. I immediately start rooting for whichever team is losing an NCAA tournament game. I'm kind of the same way.
Francisco Molinari yesterday.
You got your wish with him.
Great villain. Front nine, guy was like a robot. Was parring everything, par save after par save, and then on 12, he just chunks it into the water. And then he does it again on 15.
Yeah.
Just great theater.
Oh, it was fantastic. Miriam Martin Corbin, by the way, mentions Tiger come back with the back issues. For the people who don't follow golf maybe as closely as I do and follow sports as closely as Connor does, I think it's probably amazing to find out just how hurt Tiger was at one point in time. And frankly, a lot of the wounds that we've seen Tiger deal with to a certain extent are self-inflicted. We can't deny that. But when it comes to the injury stuff, there was a moment in which he was rumored not to be able to get out of a car without being helped out of a car. That's like your Aunt Gertrude. I mean, Tiger had to be helped out of a car every time he got out of the car. As recently as 2 years ago, could barely swing a club at all and was only hitting like 50, 60-yard chip shots. That's about all he could do, and he was, dinking and donking those. I don't know that anyone has ever made a more impressive physical recovery in any sport than what Tiger has made here. To think about how far down he was.
Right, how broken he was.
To the point where, I think there was a period of time when he was essentially horizontal, your own jokes, essentially horizontal constantly. Yeah. And now he's back to winning the Masters again.
And, Wright Thompson wrote a just spectacular article a few years ago. It's very long, but basically on, Tiger's training and why his body fell apart. And it was basically because while he was winning a bunch of majors, he also decided he wanted to be a Navy SEAL, basically, and, trained with them. And it really had disastrous effects on both his back, his knee, and his Achilles. But, yeah, in terms of just, from where he was, as physically broken as an athlete as you can be to – he was second place at the British Open, was second place at the PGA Championship, and then he won the Masters. This is as good, I know he just won for the first time yesterday, but the past 8 months of Tiger is maybe as good as he's ever been.
Dallas Schwartz says Lefty's my guy. I totally agree with that. Mickelson's, I'm a fan of his. I love the video that he did before the Saturday round where he kind of took a shot at Kuchar. That was great to see. Enrique Murillo mentions Jack Nicklaus. How funny is it to think, and I promise we'll get off the golf in a second, but how funny is it to think that Nicklaus, whose entire life is golf, to get away from golf, he goes bone fishing in the Bahamas. How would you like for fishing to be your diversion to get away from golf? That's the life that Mr. Nicklaus lives at this point in time, but he had some really classy things to say. He's honest with the fact that he doesn't want to see Tiger break his record. At the same time, he's celebrating the greatness that is Woods, and it's obviously great to have him back on the national stage. I thought that was really good, and it was a terrific event. While we're off the subject of Georgian college football, we'll just get more Rotten Tomatoes thrown at us. I'll give you a chance. Don't spoil anything, please, but how was the debut last night of Game of Thrones?
It's a good table setter. If you're looking for big battle scenes and things of that nature, you're going to have to wait another 2 weeks. But it was a very good, establishing the stakes of the season. You got a very big reveal. The fans already knew, but it was a moment that a lot of people have been waiting for a long time. It was a very good table setter. I'm very excited for the next 5 weeks.
So one really quick question for me regarding Game of Thrones, and then I promise we'll get back to Georgia to finish this out. I promise. So for those of you who don't know, I've seen every season but the most recent, not the one that started last night, the one prior to that. But I've been kind of out of touch, and I'm not an expert on what goes on in Westeros. I'm not an expert whatsoever. So here's what I think I want. Later on this summer, I'm hoping to kind of get back in the episodes again and rewatch them all for the beginning. I think I need some para material, though. I think I need some accompanying content, whether it be deep dive podcast, not the books. I'm not reading those.
There is
books.
A deep dive. It's binge mode. It's by The Ringer. It's a deep dive podcast. They do a deep dive on every television episode. Yeah. It is fantastic.
Does it start from the beginning of the episode?
It starts from episode 1.
Okay, so I think I may do that, and maybe I'll invite some of y'all to do it along with me, and we'll see if we can do some notes. We'll do this away from DawgNation.
Yeah.
We'll do this on another platform of some kind. But we may go back and kind of do some of that together because obviously I'd like to get caught up, but it's not going to happen for a little while because my daughter didn't even want me to watch the Masters this weekend. It's gotten to the point where my kids play defense on me watching TV. They're just anything they can to keep me from focusing in on what's on the screen. But I guess that's the way you'd want it to be. All right, we're going to get ready to get off the air here. I will also say this. I didn't have time to do this today because we had just so much going on. But if y'all notice, we started the show on time today because y'all have given me, justifiably so, a lot of grief about how late we've gotten as of late. It started off as like 10:04, then it's like 10:19, and then like Friday, I think it was even later than that. And so we're going to change that. And I'm going to give you all the power to make sure that's what happens. So please stick with me on this. This is going to be a really good thing. I will tell you about that in the days ahead. But for those of you who like to kind of hold my feet to the fire, which you should, you have a chance to do that. Eddie Burleson, great question. He says, how do you win the Braves tickets again? So, Eddie, here's what we're going to do. I gave the trivia question early. I don't know if Connor can throw it back up on the screen again. But we're giving away the tickets for the Ronald Acuna bobblehead night. That's April 26th. This bobblehead is really cool. It's like the launch angle home run swing for Acuna. It's probably about the most perfect pose for any of the Braves bobbleheads in recent memories. So this is April 26th. If you want your tickets, you go to Braves.com/tickets to get in on that and find out how you can be a part of that, Braves.com/tickets. But we are giving away a set of 4 tickets for that night. Acuna was last year's National League Rookie of the Year winner. What we asked earlier in the show was, who was the previous Brave before Acuna to win this award? If you know, when we post the show later on this afternoon at the world-famous DawgNation.com, Georgia Football Podcast, you'll see that there. Click inside the post. Put your answer in the comment section at the bottom of that post. We'll take everyone who has the correct answer. We'll put them in a hat, and we will draw out a winner. These are good tickets. If you're not the kind of person that typically plays along for contests, this is one you're going to want to get involved with. So we'll draw out a winner. All you got to do is be one of the correct answers of who was the Brave prior to Acuna to win National League Rookie of the Year. We'll draw out, among our winners, we'll draw out an answer for that, and you shall win those tickets. So really, really good stuff.
Parting question here.
Please.
Hold on. Chad Thomas Black asked, real quick, predict best G-Day standout. I'm going to tweak this a little bit. It's a bold prediction for me. Matt Landers leads Georgia in receiving on Saturday.
Okay, now typically that's a little bit like, winning the par 3 contest, the Masters. Being the G-Day standout has not always been a good thing.
Jonathan Rumpf has done this in the past. Jeremiah Holloman did it his very first year.
I was about to say that though. Holloman is either a counterexample or the start of a new trend, because while Holloman doesn't pop in 2017, the Holloman we saw in 2018 was foreshadowed by G-Day. So it doesn't always have to be a bad thing to be a G-Day standout. But your take is Matt Landers here?
Matt Landers leads Georgia in receiving on Saturday.
That's a pretty good one. I think Harrian's going to have a good day.
Mm-hmm. Who leads Georgia in tackles?
I hope it's LeCount.
You hope it too?
LeCount. I hope he's just
he's just ready to go. You'll see something on the website later today about Richard LeCount.
Good. Yeah, I hope it is. This is going to be mostly about buzz, not actual stats, because let's face it, you're not going to sack quarterbacks. I do believe that Nolan Smith will leave G-Day as the most talked about player from that game. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to set up shows like ours. I mean, we're going to be so obnoxious talking about Nolan Smith all summer long. I'm just going to go ahead and put the warning out into the universe now that we're going to be obscenely obnoxious with our Nolan Smith hype, in May and June and July, because I do believe something's going to happen on G-Day. Because you've said before that he's not as famous as the typical number 1 recruit is. Correct. And I think for whatever reason, that may be true. There are a lot of Georgia fans who, and I think this is mostly due to the fact that Georgia is a loaded roster altogether right now. There are a lot of Georgia fans who just think of Nolan Smith as among the talented players on this Georgia roster. I think he may separate himself a bit on Saturday. He may be one of those things where he's just a lot more talked about by the average rank-and-file fan, because the one thing that many of you should be aware of, if you're a regular commenter to DawgNation Daily, you are not really the regular fan. I mention a recruit, and almost all of you know exactly who I'm talking about. That puts you in kind of like the very high 90th percentile in terms of your knowledge and the degree to which you follow Georgia football. Most of the G-Day crowd is just not nearly that plugged in. Many of them are, but all of them are not. And so I think that Nolan Smith is going to very much acquaint himself, introduce himself to that other category of fan on Saturday.
I would agree.
Sean Doyle says, who on the defense will have the most interceptions? I saw where Bama had 4 picks on Saturday. I hope Georgia doesn't throw 4 picks. That wouldn't be too good. But how much fun would it be, Sean, if one of the young guys? Because one of the things that Kirby said on Saturday was the secondary is what it's going to be. All the guys who are going to be here in the summer are here right now. What if a DJ Daniel or a Tyreek Stevenson gets a pick on Saturday? That'd be a lot of fun.
I think one of the things maybe we haven't written about yet here at DawgNation, Kirby really, really likes his secondary this spring.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. That's going to be good stuff. I like this from Chris Branham. This would make me very happy. Maybe we'll do some more of this week. He says offensive MVP D-Rob. That would be sensational. Defensive MVP Tyson Campbell. That'd make me very happy. Y'all know I like Campbell. That would be good times right there. So we'll keep this conversation going throughout the week. We got to go for now, though. Y'all have a great Monday. We'll have DN90 later on. Back in Athens, I'm guessing again tomorrow. Getting ready for Georgia practice and everything else. And then heading to Marlowe's on Wednesday. Don't forget that. That's going to be a blast. And then heading towards G-Day on Saturday. So keep it close to the DawgNation video channels and everything else around DawgNation.com for that. Huge thanks to our friends Dari and the whole gang at R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. If it's time to replace your AC, trust R.S. Andrews to do that. New water heater, kind of the same way. All those big major systems in your house, R.S. Andrews can get them fixed when they're broken, or if it's time to replace, you want that trusted source to be able to provide you really good peace of mind about that new equipment, and R.S. Andrews will certainly provide that. Online at rsandrews.com, they bring the R.S. Andrews cool down to us each and every day. Y'all have a great day. Don't forget to get your answer submitted for a chance to win those Braves tickets. We'll see you tomorrow right back here on DawgNation Daily.